aviation must get to net zero by 2050 with a goal of stabilizing warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So why an aviation panel without airlines? Airlines are at the heart of climate solutions. However, airlines by themselves have not been able to scale the most promising solution, aviation fuel, or also known as SAF. Airlines cannot afford to pay SAF's full price premium. This is where corporate customers can make critical contributions. The Clean Skies for Tomorrow program, led by the World Economic Forum, was formed to accelerate SAF industry growth. And one associated work stream focused on catalyzing voluntary air transport customers and their demand. Members of this panel have played an instrumental role developing the SAF certificate within Clean Skies for Tomorrow. SAF can help corporations reach their net zero goals under science-based targets. Companies can purchase the virtual environmental attributes associated with SAF and help cover the price premiums that airlines are unable to pay for themselves. With a SAF certificate, or SAF-C, corporations can address their emissions for flights that cannot be replaced by video meetings. My fellow panelists today will share how SAF and potentially how the SAF certificate factors into their business or organization and their viewpoints regarding net zero corporate travel and air cargo. Our first speaker is a corporate SAF leader. Julia Fiedler represents SAF voluntary actions from corporate customers. Julia is the Senior Sustainability Program Manager of Procurement at Microsoft. Julia leads Microsoft's sustainable aviation fuel efforts as part of the procurement sustainability team, also working to engage Microsoft's indirect suppliers to reduce Scope 3 emissions. Additionally, she's part of the team who manage and has been described as the world's largest purchase of carbon removal. With a background in the travel industry, prior to joining the sustainability team, Julia led employee experience and engagement in Microsoft's travel program. Based in the UK, Julia has embraced the hybrid work environment for the past 10 years. And with that, I pass it to Julia.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you for having me today. I'd like to start by providing some context to the possible question of why would somebody from Microsoft be on a panel speaking about sustainable aviation fuel. And to answer that question, I need to take a step back and describe a little about the background of Microsoft's climate ambitions. If I can ask for a progression on the slides. Super, thank you. And this is a great description of the way that Microsoft would view the current challenges around climate change. We definitely see them as the most significant challenges of our lifetime. And just as human-caused greenhouse gas emissions are responsible for global warming, the human actions that we can all participate in still have the potential to determine the future course of the climate. Strong sustained reductions in emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases can really limit the climate change challenges that we all face. We believe it's not too late to put together a future that allows everyone to not only survive, but to also thrive. And for that, we need to work at the intersection of technology and science. Next slide, please. In January 2020, Microsoft announced a bold commitment to operate with 100% renewable energy by 2025, that we should be carbon negative by 2030. And then we've built on that pledge with several of industry-leading commitments, those including being water positive, zero waste, and that we should develop a planetary computer to better monitor, model, and manage the world's ecosystems that protect the land that we use. And across our company, teams are driving these ambitious goals internally. We're helping to set best practices and new standards for businesses around the world. Next slide, please. So prioritizing carbon is a top area for action. And having been carbon neutral since 2012, Microsoft is now working to become carbon negative by 2030 and to reduce our Scope 3 emissions by more than half by 2030, then to remove more carbon from the atmosphere than we've emitted. So now we can talk about travel. Within those Scope 3 emissions that we're focused on reducing is our corporate travel emissions. And although they're not the largest emission category for Microsoft, they're still a substantial amount and what's commonly described as a hard to abate sector. So even prior to these latest ambitions being announced, we'd started to explore how we could work to reduce these emissions, and more specifically, how we could replace the use of fossil fuels whenever possible. Next slide, please. So this leads us on to the topic of sustainable aviation fuel, the main topic for today at last. So it was thanks to an introduction by KLM, one of our main airlines, that Microsoft works closely together with, that we started to explore how sustainable aviation fuel could form part of our overall emissions reductions plans. And my role at the time was to lead our employee engagement and experience work. And within there, we had already started to build a substantial education plan for employees and managers to help to reduce the number of trips. However, this being pre-pandemic, before real trip reduction had been demonstrated, it was difficult to imagine a pathway to reducing trips by 50% in what was a growing global company. So we started to explore sustainable aviation fuel to learn how it was made, what risks and challenges are involved in the market, and what role Microsoft specifically could have in bringing it to scale as a potential solution. What a learning curve that has been. And our first purchase and the learning that we enabled from that purchase allowed us to create a criteria for future purchases, which is what you see here today. So we cover such topics as feedstock, where we took and avoid any association with palm oil position, for example. We talked about transparency, where we look for RSB certification to provide independent assurance as to the complexity of logistics and transporting the fuel, all of the supply chain involved. And then we consider complex topics such as additionality and double counting, which we continue to learn about today. So whilst we are not always able to support these criteria in full today, they're important for us to work towards, and they're important learning points for us to pivot around and continue to grow. To date, if I can move to the next slide, sorry. To date, we've made a couple of purchases, a number of purchases, in fact, two of which we can talk about here today. The first being the KLM Microsoft partnership that I mentioned, the second being Alaska Airlines together with Sky Energy and Microsoft. And with each of those, we continue to learn and grow about the challenges and the opportunity for sustainable aviation fuel to scale, and where corporates like Microsoft can play a really important part. From then, we joined the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Buyers Alliance. And we work together with like-minded companies to see how we can bring scale, we can share learning, and we can really progress some of the outstanding challenges. And there are many. This is not an easy, fit-for-purpose, ready-to-buy purchase for addressing emissions to business travel today. So I'm delighted to also say that we're part of the World Economic Forum Clean Skies for Tomorrow organization, and therefore delighted to support this participation where so many of those important parts are coming together to talk to you today. With that, I'll hand back to you, Adam. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Julia. So next, I am honored to introduce Charlotte Hardenbull, who's representing SAF production and supply. Charlotte is the head of programs and solutions at Sky NRG, a pioneer and global leader in the development of sustainable aviation fuel. She focuses on the development and growth of innovative and transformative partnerships to raise global awareness, fund the green premium, and accelerate the transition to a sustainable aviation. Examples include the aforementioned KLM corporate SAF program, the Fly Green Fund, and the Board Now program, linked to Sky Energy's new production capacity projects. Charlotte is based in the Netherlands. Charlotte, passing it over to you.
Thank you, Adam, for that nice introduction, and thank you all for having me here today. Maybe already start with progressing the slide and telling you a little bit more about Sky Energy. So we've been around for more than 10 years, which is basically the start of this industry. We were founded to make the market for SAF. So initially look at, is it really feasible to supply SAF? Is it safe? Can we really make sure that this is a sustainable alternative to fossil jet fuels? And how can we accelerate the adoption of these fuels? And so around that, we've built our business sourcing and supplying sustainable aviation fuels for over those 10 years, taking a very important role in funding the premium that was there 10 years ago and quite significantly has been brought down over the decade by bringing together airlines, corporates, and travelers. Since 4 years, we have started actually developing dedicated production facilities for sustainable aviation fuels, basically coming out of the 10-year work in different research and development projects to commercialize new sustainable aviation fuels technologies. And that in a nutshell is Sky Energy. So happy to progress to the next slide. So just very quickly, I think very important in sustainable aviation fuels and a key to every decision we've made in the past 10 years and in the decades to come is making sure that the fuels that we deliver are truly sustainable. The way that Sky Energy has approached this is by setting up its own independent sustainability board, in which, for instance, WWF holds a seat. We are RSB certified, and we very closely work together with a global network of NGOs, because every sustainable aviation fuel project has its own more regional challenges and difficulties, which we want to face together with these NGOs. And on the right-hand side, you see that our model is also very much based on partnership, collaboration with all types of stakeholders to really advance sustainable aviation fuels. And some of those stakeholders here with me today in this panel. Next slide, please. So as I said, we've from the start seen that a multi-stakeholder approach is key to advance SAF, specifically for our ambition to develop dedicated sustainable aviation fuels production capacity. We see that you need a couple of pieces to form that puzzle, to create that project. And the puzzle has to be completed by the demand side. And demand side for the first half of the decade has been mostly airlines, showing that it was possible that they were willing to fund the premium. But we see increasingly a need for end customers like corporate travelers to step in and help the development of sustainable aviation fuels. Very, very quickly, the main roles for these corporate travelers are helping to co-fund the premium that is still out there, and so reduce financial exposure for airlines, really help create a stable demand signal so that finance industry sees that these types of projects will be around and there will be demand for a long time going, and in the end raise global awareness and support for these fuels by broadening the stakeholder group talking about SAFs. Next slide, please. Very concretely, Sky Energy has been working with corporate customers for over 8 years now, starting off with the KLM corporate SAF program, of which Julia has also touched upon. We have 2 years after that start with KLM, launched the Fly Green Fund, which is a non-for-profit fund, basically airline independent, but focusing on sustainable aviation fuel project development in the Nordics, in Scandinavia. And thirdly, a program that we launched 2 years ago this month, which is the Board Now program, which I will talk about a little bit more in a minute or so. And lastly, a project that we actually launched today, which is a white label solution for travel organizations, TMCs, OTAs, but also airlines, where they can, from a white label perspective, integrate a solution to offer their customers sustainable aviation fuels, all with the aim to increase uptake and share the price premium. Next slide, please. So just diving a little bit into one of our more concrete examples of how a corporate customer can play a truly crucial role in enabling future production capacity is our Board Now program. As we have set out to develop dedicated production facilities and need to bring together all those pieces of the puzzle, of which an offtake is super important, we've seen that if we have forward offtake commitments from corporate customers that are wanting to fly long-term on these sustainable aviation fuels, and we get those commitments forward, that will then enable the business case or show an investor that there's a guaranteed offtake of the premium of the fuels, that it's way easier to not only bring together all these pieces of the puzzle, but it actually helps us achieve financing for such facilities faster and sometimes at a lower cost rate. So what we ask these corporates is to commit for the first 5 years of a new production facility, and with that we go to the bank, actually get funding to build it, get it online, and once it's online, deliver these fuels to an airport, and the corporate that has committed to receive the carbon reduction claims from these sustainable aviation fuels. And I think it's a very nice example of how you can see that corporate customers, although it seems far from their core business, can play a really critical role in scaling up this industry. And I'd like to leave it with that. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Excellent. Fernando is our third exciting speaker, and he joins us representing global NGOs and climate action programs. Fernando's full name is Fernando Rangel Biasana. He is the technical lead for SBTI, which is the acronym for Science-Based Targets Initiative, working for WWF. Within the initiative, Fernando is primarily responsible for coordinating new technical resource developments and has authored science-based target setting methodologies for the transportation sector. His previous experience includes air quality and carbon consulting, GHG auditing, and public policy analysis on sustainability, clean tech, and renewables. He is an industrial engineer with a master's degree in environmental management, and he currently lives in Mexico. And with that, passing it over to Fernando.
Thank you very much, Adam, for that kind introduction. I'm very excited to be joining this conversation with my fellow panelists, and I am going to start by sharing a very quick overview of what the SBTI is and our journey to support climate commitments from the private sector, and of course touching on the role of SAF. So can you move to the next slide, please? So this is actually part also of a personal journey, as I joined very early on, soon after the initiative was created in 2015, and it was created by 4 civil society organizations: CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, WRI, UN Global Compact, and WWF. The initiative is aimed at mobilizing the corporate sector to set ambitious emission reduction targets. Effectively, we're calling them SBTs, or science-based targets, which are no more than targets aligned with what the climate science deems necessary to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. Both goals are well below 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees are very important to avoid catastrophic climate change. I'm not going to go into the details of not meeting the Paris Agreement carbon reduction goals, but they are quite severe, and this is why we want to mobilize the private sector to complement the action from governments and other stakeholders. Along this journey, and as of this month, we have had more than 2,000 companies worldwide committed to setting SBTs. That number is inclusive of companies of all sizes, mainly from high-emitting sectors, but also extending to SMEs. About 1,000, actually, no, over 1,000 by this week, over 1,000 of those targets have been validated by us by assessing their ambition against our criteria, and roughly 2/3 of the all approved targets are in line with a 1.5C goal. So this is just how we have evolved in this past almost 6 years of existence of the Science-Based Target Initiative, and we continue to support the growth in terms of number of companies with 1.5C targets by developing better and more specific resources and guidance. And there is a very, very important aspect of our impact, and this fact just became relevant in one of our update reports, where we assessed that between 2015 and 2020, companies with approved targets reduced their absolute emissions on average by 25%. So that is actually a great step, a great example of climate action and climate leadership by the corporates. And we just want to continue supporting that because it complements government action, and it complements specifically what is left out of the Paris Agreement and this emissions gap, which governments are taking time to pick up. But yeah, this is us, and this is what we do, and we do support and want to keep supporting climate commitments from corporates. Next slide, please. The next slide is about the one example of these new resources and these new sectors that we venture into, and that we believe are important, and they need, and that we need their contribution to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. This, of course, the aviation sector, which is evidently a high emitting sector and a hard to abate sector, for which there's always been a little bit of a delay in action, but that we have now issued a guidance and tool to help both airlines and users of aviation services determine an ambitious target over their well-to-wake emissions. And why do we choose this well-to-wake, or what is this well-to-wake bound, conceptual boundary? Well, it's taking into account all of the emissions from directly from the fuel combustion, but also upstream at the production and distribution stage, which become very relevant when we're speaking about SAF. Looking at this life cycle view of fuels makes it more robust, or makes for a more credible comparison on a life cycle basis, to put a SAF right beside a traditional jet fuel. And we also decided that we should not be focusing on a specific type of air transport activity. So this guidance is tackling both passenger and freight transport. Obviously, this also includes users of air cargo, users of air passenger transports, or corporate travelers. And in our guidance document, and this is the last I'm going to talk about this guidance and move on to the SAF topic. But the guidance document is describing exactly what assumptions are embedded in this decarbonization scenario, some best practice for target setting, but also, and very importantly, we wanted to tackle a little bit on the GHG accounting, specifically pertaining to SAF, because there are a lot of questions about how corporates are expected to account for SAF and reflect that in the inventories and capture the benefits of directly purchasing SAF to mitigate their business travel emissions. So with that, if we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the role of SAF and of SAF certificates. And in this thing, in this slide, I just want to start by saying that it's undeniably that to decarbonize the aviation sector, we need to discuss SAF. SAF is required. SAF is a part of all the decarbonization scenarios that are available for aviation, alongside all the things that will gradually penetrate alternative propulsion, operational efficiencies, basically modal shift, which is an important lever in many jurisdictions, the ability to direct demand to other transport modes. But SAF will be needed to decarbonize aviation in the short and in the long term. However, there is both opportunities and challenges. We need to acknowledge that not all SAF helps. Some advanced biofuels and power to liquid fuels will present or will yield higher benefits than other crop-based biofuels. We also need to acknowledge that there is a very limited amount of capacity at the corporate level to properly account for SAF use. There are few emission factors and guidance available. There's an incipient accounting guidelines for SAF insetting that was released over the summer by the Sciencebased Center, for example. There is, of course, the work from Clean Skies for Tomorrow, which we are all working to harmonize in terms of how we account better for SAF use. And yeah, in those terms, there is also certain limitations and restrictions around book and claim mechanisms, most notably introducing of any sort of tradable certificate. And this restricts the participation of SAF procurement by users of aviation services, or by corporate travelers. These restrictions are actually not incentivizing a broader participation in using SAF by the user side, on the demand side. And specifically talking about the challenges and opportunities for SAF-C, the way I see it and the way we expect it from the side of the initiative is that in all of these scenarios, SAF is very relevant, but an instrument that would help deliver SAF should not focus on delivering more or cheaper SAF, but actually better SAF. This is the great opportunity, and this is also a great challenge. And this is key in the design of environmental market instruments that we need to design them according to the sustainability objectives that we pursue, and not conflate that with production scale up or with a specific price reduction or price competitiveness ahead of those sustainability objectives. That is one of the challenges that we believe are important to address from the design of that program or framework. The great expectation from our side is that SAF will correct social and environmental externalities from the SAF reduction. There is a lot of questions into different biomass feedstocks and what is really the benefit from incentivizing a specific type of feedstock for biofuel production in general, not just SAF, of course. But we believe that SAF-Cs could even optimize the benefits that arises from SAF, and also help us improve traceability of those benefits. So these are kind of the expectations that we have at the higher level. At the more operational level, of course, we believe that SAF or any corporate claims around SAF use should address what are the national and regional SAF mandates. This is akin to the concept of additionality, but not quite. It's more, I guess, of a regulatory surplus perspective, in that we see SAF being used on top of what a jurisdiction requires in terms of SAF use, and that is important to make the claims from corporates more credible and more robust. On that note, having or preventing any sort of double counting instances or potential of double counting or multiple counting even, it's also quite important, because we're talking about corporate travelers, and the credibility and the robustness of their climate commitments depends on this type of instruments as a backup. And I think that, yeah, there is many opportunities for corporates to participate in this market, both through direct procurement, to offtake agreements, to SAF certificates. But yeah, we first need to demonstrate that the credibility and the robustness of any of these instruments is there, and that they are designed with the right principles and the right priorities in mind, and not just simply to scale up production, which may lead to very troubling externalities, which of course none of us want. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Adam. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Fernando. I appreciate all three of our speakers and one of the presentations. We are going to move now to a few pre-prepared questions, but then we'll move to audience questions after that. So I'll start with a question, and we'll have responses from each of our panelists. And yeah, feel free to advance to the last slide, maybe before we go to the Q&A. Here are resources that were discussed today. If you're want to seek additional information, this could be useful too. You'll see more information about the Board Now program that Charlotte covered, more information about Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance that was mentioned by Julia, about more information about the Microsoft carbon dioxide removal white paper, which is very exciting for people who want to get into the weeds and understand the technical details. Information about the Science-Based Targets Initiative around aviation, and then information about the Clean Skies for Tomorrow SAF certificate report that was published this summer. And then some breaking news, there was a new report came out from a corporation today on their SAF purchases. Might be interesting for you to check out. It's by Deloitte. Okay, so for our first question, we're going to start with Julia. Microsoft and you as professionally have invested considerable resources in helping to shape a climate solution for aviation. Can you share when is the right time for other corporations who are moving towards net zero flying to get involved? What you recommend and why?
So I think you can imagine I would say now, and I do really mean now. I think there is no time to waste, certainly to start the learning journey. So I don't necessarily think all companies should go and buy sustainable aviation fuel today. It's not appropriate for them all. And the supply is so limited that we start to come into some significant challenges if we all start to compete for the availability of the fuel that exists today. What we do need to start doing, though, is learning and cross-collaborating within our organizations to ensure that all the stakeholders are ready to support the right investments at the right time. And they may well be investments in the first phase. It may not be a true purchase. So depending on what opportunities are available within your organization, whether you can consider investing in sustainable aviation fuel, so you can really directly influence the additional production of sustainable aviation fuel, or whether it's making smaller purchases to really understand the challenges that still exist around the carbon accounting or the criteria or the feedstock, the topics that Fernando and Charlotte also covered. Then I would really say learning is the first stage, and I would say cross-company collaboration, making sure you're right, the stakeholders, whether it's be sustainability, talking to the corporate travel teams, talking to purchasing, talking to the finance team, making sure you've got finance structures in place, whether you need something like the carbon fee, which is certainly what enabled Microsoft to start to explore this type of opportunity in its first phase. Without those type of organizational structures in place and without cross-company collaboration where you can share the knowledge, sustainability can educate corporate travel can start to engage with their suppliers and start to explore what are our airline partners doing today, and make sure we have a voice in that we're, to Fernando's point, not just supporting drive to the lowest common denominator or lowest price, that we really look at actually investing in high quality sustainable aviation fuel, really considering the environmental implications of what we're purchasing. This is not an easy area to learn about. It's not an easy purchasing commodity, and there are many challenges in our way before we can really implement this as a strategy to reduce emissions. But starting now would be absolutely my recommendation.
Thank you. Next question is for Charlotte. There's growing demand for SAF and more customers showing a willingness to pay the price premium. Can you explain how this source of demand you mentioned in your slide could unlock new production supply, but if you could provide a few more details?
Sure. Yeah, I think very concretely indeed, as in with the Board Now program, you see if there's a lock-in of longer term demand, secured demand for a future production facility. It basically just helps build a business case for such a facility. We'll know that there are players that are willing to pay the premium for those fuels in return for the carbon reduction claims. And so when we go to financiers, we go into the market, they are certain of a return. With that, likely there's a reduction of actually financing costs, and we can enable that facility. So there it's very direct, but at the same time, connecting corporates to specific projects like that, as we do with Board Now, also increases the public profile of a project. So all those other pieces of the puzzle, bringing in government, bringing in the airport, getting in the airline, those kinds of pieces of the puzzle are easier to get together with strong corporate partners involved in a project. So I think specifically from a board mount perspective, that is it. But in general, for any type of SAF commitment from a corporate, really raising awareness, educating other types of stakeholders, and basically generating wider support for SAF is just beneficial to having it on the agendas of governments, of airlines, and in the end to really scale this this solution.
Thank you, Charlotte. Next question is for Fernando. For the current science-based target aviation guidance, you had mentioned it's structured around the Paris Accord 1.8 degree aligned goal. Can you explain what your plans are, science-based target plans are for net zero by 2050 and 1.5 Celsius alignment?
And those are really good questions. I have some good news to share, and I can make this announcement now in two ways. First of all, yes, we are integrating and as a complement to our current set of resources for the aviation sector, we'll be integrating the 1.5 degree benchmark for airlines. So that will be enabled in the tool and covered in our guidance document. So these plans are to release this before the end of the year. So first week of December is our aspired date to relaunch the aviation sector guidance and tool. And then tomorrow, the initiative will release the net zero manual. That's going to be inclusive of all sectors except for forest, land, and agriculture sector. But we will be releasing our net zero criteria or net zero manual and a net zero tool to help companies define the ambition for targets with a 2050 goal of reaching net zero emissions. As per the definitions that we had introduced in our foundations of net zero target setting, which is a document we released last year. But this is all complementary. The initiative is moving to release as many 1.5 degree aligned pathways as possible so that these near-term SBTs are conducive and complementary to these long-term SBTs and help companies stay on the path towards reaching net zero in 2050. So we see this as complementary, and we will continue to advance our work on other transport sector categories to also provide 1.5 degrees pathway. The first one actually will be aviation, so I'm very happy about it.
Great, thank you, Fernando. I'm going to move to the audience questions, and I'm going to combine some, take the liberty for efficiency's sake. First one, questions for Charlotte. Charlotte, in regards to the SAF product and emissions factor, and potentially also in your own production, what can customers expect to see for emissions reductions? And what are you thinking about in terms of additional ways to reduce carbon, such as carbon capture during the production process?
Good question. So I think when you look at the fuels that are out there today, and the volumes are limited, but the fuels out there today, sustainable aviation fuels, reduce approximately between 70 and 80% carbon emissions when compared to fossil jet fuels. So that's quite significant. Looking at the facility that we're building right now, working on in the Netherlands, we are looking at an 85 to 90% carbon reduction. And that's mainly due to the use of green hydrogen and other green energy inputs rather than gray ones. Looking at other technologies to reduce emissions during production. That facility in the Netherlands is going to be a fossil-free facility, actually. So there's all types of ways to reduce your emissions during production, but they are already encompassed in the carbon performance of the actual fuel. So I'd say that's where we approximately are, and going forward in the future, we could see carbon reductions or carbon performance even going beyond that 90%.
Thank you, Charlotte. Next question is for Julia. Julia, there are questions about how corporations and airlines together can pay. How is that calculated? How does it work out when you have multiple parties who are covering the same premium from your perspective?
I'd say that it varies today. I think it depends on how which airline partner you're working with, how advanced their strategy is, and how well they align with your corporate ambitions. So I do think that there's a place and a time for corporates to fully fund the purchase of sustainable aviation fuel, where it aligns perhaps with a drive in ambitions around the quality of the fuel, for example, or other projects that mean that they can take advantage of perhaps initiatives internally, so they can perhaps go at a faster pace than some of their airline partners might be able to do. However, in the future, I absolutely anticipate that it should be a more shared role in funding sustainable aviation fuel. It's just going to be complex. Between now and, let's say, a vision where sustainable aviation fuel is embedded in the ticket price, which is absolutely what we want to work towards, I believe we have a number of years ahead of us where we need to clarify the outstanding questions around carbon accounting, where we need to dramatically increase the amount of production, and we need to pay more for advanced technologies and advanced feedstocks. So I think there'll always be a balance between times when it's appropriate that we share the cost, times when it's appropriate we might go further and faster than perhaps our airline partners are in a position to do so. But I do think that we should celebrate the airline partners who are really thinking through this strategy and have long-term plans where they're investing with partners for production facilities to come in line in the next couple of years. So those partnerships we should celebrate. And we should really encourage our airline partners to take on science-based targets, to really step forward and be ambitious. So if it's a partnership approach and partnership includes joint funding, then we should have flexibility in that.
Thank you, Julia. We're going to wrap up with the last question. Now we're right at time, but I think we can go over 1 or 2 minutes. It's a science-based targets and wealthy companies. Fernando, what is your group seeing in terms of companies that may have more resources and how aggressive they are moving with climate alignment? What are you seeing across those companies, versus other companies who may be slower to take action? What's the rate of different responses you're seeing from corporations that links up with how wealthy the companies are?
Well, certainly the options available for a company setting targets over their business travel emissions is, first of all, to switch to different working arrangements, reduce travel as much as possible, and try to both do a cost-saving strategy together, coupled with an emission reduction strategy. But essentially, it comes to a point where for many businesses, giving up entirely on flying is not an option, and therefore we believe that at the moment, the option of direct SAF procurement is restricted, or is not restricted, but is mostly taken up by companies that can afford to participate and have the internal expertise to come up with this type of schemes. And that is one of the things where maybe different participation frameworks or schemes could open it up to other types of companies. And I also believe that, like Julia was mentioning, as more airlines take up a science-based targets, that would also have a systemic effect on decarbonizing, on bringing down the emission factors on a per flight basis, so that all companies will eventually benefit, which is a direct analogy to what happens in the power sector, where power generators setting SBTs, everybody lowers the grid emission factor and everybody benefits. It cascades down that reduction effect to all other sectors. So yes, certainly SAF procurement, direct SAF procurement is not something every company is prepared to do, but there can be some systemic effects coming up by collaboration and by introducing new, more creative schemes.
Thank you very much, Fernando, and thank you all panelists here. Thank you, Charlotte and Julia, and appreciate your audience participation for questions and also listening to us today. As you think about returning to the sky, please consider using sustainable aviation fuel. We know that we can fly sustainably, especially if we're selecting responsible fuels that are certified through RSB, ISCC, and meet the criteria around reducing or minimizing indirect land use change and truly achieving high emissions factor reductions, high carbon intensity reductions. So thank you all again. With that, we will conclude our session, and feel free to search out the panelists in this session for follow-up questions if they arise, and we look forward to seeing you in future sessions.